Hello, everyone. It's Professor Hamamoto here, and it is the beautiful day of May 7, 4 p.m. PDT. And I have for you today a wonderfully interesting talk that relates to all of us, at least all of us who've ever felt that we never perhaps measured up so far as the intelligence is concerned. Physically, physical prowess. That's one element, of course, of growing up, but intelligence is another. And as such, I've titled today's talk Termites." Right, I'll explain what that means in a moment. Termites, and the Stanford Genius Breeding Farm. And when I say breeding farm, I mean that quite literally. Hello, Melissa's mind. Hey, all. You're the only person here. So I know I gave late notice here, but I thought I should do it earlier, this talk earlier than later, because it's Sunday and I know people are winding down, especially in the Eastern and Central time zone. So welcome. But I figure people will catch this show on the replay unless it's taken down by TubeView. I don't think I'm going to be saying anything untoward today, so you'll have a chance to pick it up. So when I say Genius Breeding Farm as part of the title today, I mean that literally, right? And Stanford, as you know, because I've been giving talks on this for the last, I don't know, a few weeks or so, I talked about Jane Stanford, who was the spouse of Leland Stanford, and together they founded what is today one of the top research institutions, universities in the world, right? Right here in California, not far from where I am, and it's not an accident, as I've explained earlier. It's built on the earlier colonial Spanish mission system, and I'm thinking it also might have something to do with a Templar connection. Santa Clara, isn't it? It means Saint Clair or Sinclair, as in Prince Henry Sinclair of the Templars. So I'm not going to talk about that too soon, but I'm exploring that connection. This because Santa Clara County is the heart of so-called Silicon Valley, where Stanford University grew and arose, right? Thanks to the leadership of certain figures like a David Starr Jordan. I wonder if it was the 5-pointed star, that of Venus. David Starr Jordan. He wanted to make sure his middle name was known. But he was one of the top eugenicists of his day. This is not me saying it. This is any number of top scholars. Wendy Klein, Building the Better Race. I have all these books. I've been lecturing on this for 15 years, maybe earlier. But I really started hitting it hard when I was teaching a class in Asian American sexuality, because eugenics has to do with breeding, and it has to do with intelligence, and has to do with building a better race. And we're talking about Asian American people, and they've had an interesting history with Stanford University. In the early days, they weren't allowed near the place except as gardeners or as delivering produce, because we were in that niche agriculture back in the old days, like the turn of the century, the 1900s, late 1800s, until we were excluded. I'm talking about Japanese immigrants, were barred from the United States back in 1924. And that was to last until 1965. All right. So we were targeted, and it was because of people like not Leland Stanford so much, not even Jane Stanford, who I talked about earlier as being a spiritualist and being murdered, probably by David Starr Jordan or one of his henchmen, who was a eugenicist and hate Japanese people. I mean, the everyday ones, the peasantry, which, by the way, the Japanese elite hated their own peasants, just like the people in America or so-called white people. The elite hate underclass white people. You understand? And your boule types, your bourgeois black people or African Americans, they hate the black underclass. You understand? So it's not as simple as race. The class figures hugely in this type of system here, right? So on a personal level, on a professional level at UC Davis, and by the way, I thought it was a good omen. I found this long report that was issued by someone who headed an investigation, or not, it was a trial of me. I went through 2 trials in 3 years. They were lodged by the dean. Was she the dean? I guess she was the dean at the time, or she was the vice chancellor, something like that. And she was a self-professed lesbian, and I wouldn't really even mention her sexual orientation, except for the fact that she made a big issue out of it. And I suspect she hated me because I'm a heteronormative, that's the term from GLBTQ studies. I'll get to the topic in a moment. Just please indulge me. I like to go on these little personal trips down memory lane here. So she had a big boner for me, even though she's a woman. She had a big boner for me. And she didn't like my macho attitude. And of course, she probably thought that since, I'm of Japanese background, I make sure women walk 3 paces behind me and that they have to bow to me wherever I walk and tread, right? So she's one of these left-wing liberal type people who are worse than your David Starr Jordan, because at least David Starr Jordan, he didn't want you. He didn't like you. His henchmen at Stanford, these professors would say, listen, we have to send the boats off the coast of California and make sure Japanese immigrants do not land here on California. And by the way, Jane Stanford, who was the co-founder with her husband, Leland, she stood up for us. She liked Asians. She liked Orientals. She'd been to Japan her husband had been to Japan. He loved it. David Starr Jordan had been to Japan, but just to deal with the elites, right? He was okay with the emperor system and all that because to him, I'm sure he thought that was wonderful. He didn't like the underclass, right? And for her troubles, Jane Stanford was murdered. And again, probably check out the previous talk I gave on that. And I'll probably be revisiting that sooner than later. She was a spiritualist. Nothing wrong with that. Later on, it became weaponized and it was used as a spiritualism or theosophy, all of that, the perennial philosophy. Later, it was it transmuted into a tool against Christianity, which is what's going on right now. But back in the late 19th century and 20th century, I don't think that was part of the agenda. Anyway, so we're talking about a history here that's very much with us today in 2023. As you saw the pic here on TubeView, that's an Asian American woman, a recent graduate from Stanford University. She's got the sash and she's standing in front of one of the landmarks. I don't know what it is. It's one of the arches. The Royal Arch? I don't know, but one of the arches. By the way, the mausoleum of the Stanfords, Leland and Jane Stanford, crumbled to dust during the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. So the place is kind of cursed in a way, and it's even more cursed now because then, even though the Stanfords try to steer the university in a different direction, Leland Stanford, he wasn't a nice guy himself. He was the railroad baron. He was one of the Gilded Age thieves who made a huge fortune off the back of Chinese coolie labor, which incurred the wrath of the white working class. So they say, hey, you're undercutting us. Are you white or not? He says, no, I don't care. Whoever works cheapest for me is fine. I'll take the coolies. So he had a fond, because they worked their ass off, right? And they still do today. So he respected that. He was a, you know, he came from humble origins, and same with Jane Stanford herself. But he was, after he attained his wealth, he was a horse um, breeder and a racer. Horse racing back then. This is before the tracks, and then parimutuel betting, and then all the famous racetrack. This is like old time horse race. They chart out a course, and this goes back to Spanish colonial Mexican times in California. Horse racing was big amongst the owners of the haciendas, including Mexican nationals and Spanish criollos, so whoever's in charge, the leadership, whatever they are, they love horse racing. And I think it comes from the Arab world, originally kind of migrated up to España and over to Nueva America and to California. So it's the sport of royalty. So who's more royalty than Leland Stanford? The reason I bring it up, because he was very much into horse breeding, right? And his successors, although he was dead before they really got their claws into, they stole the institution from his wife. They murdered her, and they took it in their direction. And they took it in the direction of the New World Order. That's why I was teaching this Stanford eugenics history, and the eugenics of the origins of American social science, like the American Sociological Association, all those organizations, anthropological, they were all based on this bogus race science. And by the way, if you are, quote unquote, a white person, like I told you, if you were not part of the ruling class, you were viewed as worse than non-white people, because you were letting down the race. And that was one of the biggest fears of people like David Starr Jordan, racial degeneration. That's their phrase, degeneration. And you know what? In doing this, I'm working on this book on this whole Gothic uh, crime that seeps out of the ground, right? This whole Gothic curse, let's call it, across the land. I'm doing this research, and so I've been revisiting some of the literature of my youth. And so I'm reading H.P. Lovecraft and Edgar Allan Poe. I'm just telling some of the names that you were forced to read in elementary or junior high school, just as I was. And this is no knock on the long-suffering teachers that we had, but they really didn't fully understand what they were teaching. All I knew is this is great literature and we had to read. So I'm rereading it from my perspective. And these stories over and over again, they're all about racial degeneracy, or the fear of decay, racial decay, of being soft and being overrun by people from Southern Europe and Irishmen, right? This is before Irish became white people. They went through a historical pattern, right, or historical process. And they were considered at an early stage to be lower in value than Black African slaves, because slaves were property. They were worth something. So if a Black slave fell overboard, Massa would make sure that they fished him out of the river. But if an Irishman fell overboard, they didn't care, because he's a free man, but he's not valued in the same level. So anyway, that's just some of the racial politics that I taught for many years at UC Davis. And as I'll finish my Good Omen story real quick. I'm not finished with the story. That story is gonna come back to haunt the University of California, Davis. But I'm just telling you briefly, it was a good omen, because I thought I had lost this letter and these transcripts of these hearings, it's good reading in itself, right? And this woman who had it endowed, her name was Maureen Stanton. Maureen, I think she retired. I think she'd been retired before I did. But I had all these lesbians and all these gays. This is when they were trying to bring in the GLBTQ, and I was seeing what they were doing. I was seeing that they were harbingers of the post-gender project, and I was teaching this in my courses, New World Order classes, and that was what the hearings were about. Anyway, I found the letter from Jeffrey Williams. He was in the business school, and he heard 5 days of testimony from me. And I represented myself. The first time I had a lawyer, second time I went pro se by myself. I fired my lawyer and I went against this guy, Margolis, who was from headquarters in Oakland. And he was getting instructions from big sister, Janet Napolitano, from the formerly of the DOJ and Homeland Security, who they brought over to the University of California to put me out of business. You understand that? So when I'm teaching this material here, it comes from a combative existential position. I've been through the trial of fire, and we're in it right now, and you're in it along with me because you're a human being, unless you're a bot or something in the chat room. There's a war against our species, the human species. And if you like animals like I do, I'm very fond of dogs, for example, there is a war against the animal species, right? Do you think that, well, I'm not going to, this is part of the agenda, but the rearrangement, the bioengineering, the so-called genetic engineering of animal species is all part of this project, this breeding project that had found its expression. Now I'm going to get to the heart of the talk here because this involves all of you. And by the way, if you want to make a comment, I'd appreciate it in the dubious comment section. Tell me about your experience or non-experience with these gifted students programs, okay? Because this is where this talk comes from. I polled my Patreon subscribers, and you're invited to join in. It's highly engaging. I think most people on Patreon will tell you there. I'm not just laying back. In fact, there's a lot of goodies there that I can't put on YouTube that I put on Patreon. But anyway, I took a poll and I asked members to comment on any type of experience they might have with these gifted. They go by different names. I think they're called mentally gifted minors or the TAP program or something. I remember in my school, this is in Anaheim, California. Talk about social engineering, Disneyland, Hewlett Packard from Stanford. Guess who their first client was? It was Disney. So there's a kind in Orange County, people think, oh, it's really conservative. No, it was a very important Southern California in the 50s and 60s node or region for testing. So we at John Marshall Elementary School had something called high achievement. And I think this is in 5th grade and 6th grade. They started to put these wonder kids on a separate track. And obviously I wasn't in it, right? But I will tell you, in spite of having the lesser IQ level or however they measured it. And by the way, we're going to talk about one of the kings of IQ measurement or so-called intelligence measurement, Lewis Terman, who, that hence Terman's termites, he was out of Stanford University. I think they hired him back in 1910. Yeah, and it was also talk about racial purity and trying to prevent racial degeneracy. This is their paranoia. This is their Gothic curse that I'm reading in H.P. Lovecraft, and it migrates to Poe, and it migrates into H.P. Lovecraft. And it comes down to people like Philip Dick or even contemporary SF writers in particular. And finally, there was a woman from Hong Kong who won a major science fiction award, which they had to rename because she said science fiction is all about, racial supremacy, right? And you notice that all the science fiction demons are, it's like a Ming the Merciless, and even the UFOs, all the aliens, they always have almond-shaped eyes, right? They always, they're always Asian. That's why I could never really feel SF. I could never really read it, right? Because if I was reading it, I was reading about how I'm an alien here, and and should be treated as such, something from the off planet or from the netherworld. And science fiction still um, is cursed. They have that Gothic curse within it. They're trying to change. Okay, that's the good news. Just like Stanford University eventually changed. I told you in recent times, places like Berkeley, UC Berkeley, and Stanford, and places in like Caltech, they're taking the names off these buildings of these people who are the founding fathers of American higher education. And they all subscribe to this Gothic haunting knowledge or pseudo knowledge or paranoia. And I think it has to do with first of all, with the genocide of Native America, then the auto genocide of Civil War, and then the war, World War I and World War II, when it really intensifies. And now we're in the last phase, which is when we self-immolate. We cannibalize ourselves, right? And this is the new bioeconomy, and this is the new anti-human species end game that is being promoted right now. Otherwise, I wouldn't be talking about it because it would just be of historical interest, just for nerds, right, or scholars. And a lot of the scholars don't get it either. They think it's over. They think that these historical patterns have been corrected. No, they've mutated into different forms. And ironically, a lot of the people who they once excluded from Stanford University are the yellow face expressions of the new anti-human genocide. They're Asians or Asian Americans, aren't they? Right? Like that woman, Dr. What's her face on CNN, or that crazy woman who said, yes, she's a psychiatrist out of Yale. We've got to warn the public about Donald Trump. He's crazy. This is the right to inform, or the need to inform. We've got to warn the world, right? So all these yellow people, and I wrote a book called Servers of Empire, are kind of put out there, just like Jews were used back in the 30s to push through. And I'm going to talk about this recently. They were inserted there into the professions to put through an agenda for the globalist overlords. And so they were the psychiatrists, psychologists, the social scientists, people like Kurt Lewin or Lewin, who most people don't know about. So everybody's fixated on critical race theory and GLBTQ, right? And that's a smokescreen. And I think that's being put out there because the real problem is these people who are doing operations research or structural functionism, people that later came into the social sciences during the 30s, 40s, and 50s, even though they were seen as racially unfit in America, in Germany, in Austria. But in America, they didn't have to deal with that barrier as much, and they were allowed, just like your Asians now. Oh, thank you, Ma. I can now be a doctor. I can now teach at the University of California, but you got to teach our agenda. And that's why Maureen Stanton was given orders by headquarters. Get rid of this yellow man. He's not going along with the program. Okay. I'll talk about that later. By the way, Robert K. Merton, who's one of the deans, check him out. He's the guy that coined these great phrases like self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If you want to be a great social scientist, be a great phrase monger, right? I think a lot of these guys in advertising, and a lot of them go into the movies, right? Like John Hughes, right? All those little kind of creepy teen pics that he was making. He comes out of advertising. Joseph Heller comes out of advertising, right? John Ogilvy, right? He was the dean of all. If you want to be a successful social scientist, psychologist, behavioral scientist, I'm giving you the cynical take on it right now because I don't. There's more involved than that. But if you want to be one of the tops, be a good phrase maker. Come up with great advertising copy, right? A slogan, be a good sloganeer, and you'll go right to the top. And again, I'm giving you sort of the the brokeback, jaundiced, cynical, worn out academic take on it. But all these cats are the ones who, Kurt Levine, for example, he's the guy that came up with this notion of this sensitivity training, right? I'll talk about more about it's all in it in language. It's just like a lot of the Freudian terms. We don't even think about their origins anymore. They're part of our language, and unfortunately, though, the language shapes the world view. So I'm giving you a preview. I'm going to critique this one guy who's out there talking about, oh yeah, race Marx. I got what is it, race Marxism, Marxism in the school. The people in the schools of education don't even believe that stuff, but it's being funded, it's being pushed because the crypto social sciences, which is sophisticated enough to get millions, billions of people around the world to panic from a mysterious creature from outer space, an alien. Of course, it has to be of Asian origin, just like being the merciless, right? I even hear conservatives call, oh, it's called the Kung Fu virus. It's called the Wuhan virus. Or Orange Man says it's the China virus, right? So when I'm talking about the whole SF mindset and epistemology, don't think I'm being oversensitive about it. It's happening in 2023, right? I'm a virus from outer space, baby, because I'm a yellow man. I'm the Wuhan. I'm a carrier. And you notice these days, and I figured it out, the only people you see on the street who wear a mask are Asians, just like that girl from Stanford. If she's so smart and got to Stanford and graduated with a degree from Stanford, then why she be wearing a mask? Because she's Asian and she knows that if she goes out in public without a mask, people are going to start harassing her. Because Orange Man says it's a China virus, right? Just like when I go to a supermarket and some Karen says, I said, you're a Nazi. You're a Nazi. Let's face it. And she was a Nazi, quite literally. Because I talked to her. I said, "You're from the Ukraine, how dare you come and speak to me like?" She says, "Oh no, I'm not Ukrainian. I'm German." Oh, okay, I get it. You're a Nazi. And I said, "Fuck you. Just back off, bitch." We've been through this already here in America. You're a recent immigrant, so don't try to pull this shit on me because it's not going to run. And this is how I dealt with the Dean Maureen Stanton, and these other people. They're all lesbians, and again, I don't really care, but they put it on the websites. We're part of the lesbian and gay faculty, and I said, okay, great, gay pride, great, the rainbow, flag, whatever. Be proud, of your whatever group you think you're part of. But of course, there was a larger agenda there. And I'm not kidding. This is how I deal face to face with the people at UC Davis, because I knew it was there was a political agenda there. I knew there was a haunting. I knew there was a Gothic haunting of that particular campus, if not all of them. And sure enough, I found out that my building, Hart Hall, was built on Native American burial grounds. That's why my department had these strange occurrences, right? Which I recognized and tried to take care of. Or I did take care of them, I think. So I was fighting these supernatural forces as well. Okay. And just before I move on here, I've only got 30 minutes left. I want to give you an update, because what I'm telling you about UC Davis is not a figment of my fevered H.P. Lovecraft / Edgar Allan Poe overactive imagination. But during Beltane, there were 2 murders and there was an attempted murder. Okay, I won't go into the details. If you want to check it out on TubeView, there's all kinds of reports there that you can watch. So I'm not going to consume time here. And I don't think the timing of it was accidental. And if you watch the show that I did the previous Thursday with my friend and colleague, John O'Loughlin, on Macduff Lives 2, you could also subscribe to him on Rumble. I talked about that. I talked about Beltane 2013, right? So when I'm talking about the Gothic haunting and how it's infected our institutions and how it has a genesis in places like Stanford University, right? With people like David Starr Jordan and his henchmen like Lewis Terman, I'm not exaggerating. And I'm not doing this as a historical exercise, as an intellectual academic exercise. I'm putting this out as a warning to my people, which is all people who are of the human species and animal species, especially dogs. I think I'm allergic to cats. Otherwise I'd like them too. I like to look pictures of them, but I can't have one around me because I'll swell up. I can't talk my. But dogs are cool on this. They've been playing in Poison Oak. An animal species. Let's just talk about nature. All of that is being and food. Crops. Right. It's all being re-engineered by these dark forces that have a common origin in places like Stanford University. It's not the only one, but it's the one that I've been following recent, and because I got this book, thank you to the Patreon people, you allowed me to buy a hardback version right off the press, 2023 book by a guy named Malcolm Harris. It's called Palo Alto, and if you don't know, Palo Alto is the city in which the Stanford University campus resides, and it was named by Leland Stanford himself. Palo means big oak or big tree, something like that, and their estate was down there. They used to live on Nob Hill in San Francisco. Nob Hill is probably the highest point in the peninsula of San Francisco, the city. And that's where all the rich people live, of course. But unfortunately, it made him very visible to all the hard-ass Irish working class and all the Chinamen and all the Greeks and the Armenians. And, San Francisco is a town of hard asses. They didn't really they came from all over the world. To be sailors and to mine gold and to make a fortune. They really didn't take any guff from nobody. You understand that? They were radicals. In the latter days, they were communists and stuff. A lot of political ferment there. But you wouldn't know that today because the whole gay movement was brought in part, to neutralize this contentious history, of which people like Leland Stanford and Phoebe Apperson Hearst, right? I talked about her. She's one of the key patrons of the University of California, Berkeley, which is not far from Stanford. And about George Hearst. He comes from this very similar background as Leland Stanford. He's a miner, as explorer, as a robber baron, the whole bit. And the grandfather of William Randolph Hearst, who and you probably know who Patty Hearst is, who was in this fake abduction psyop, right, with the so-called Symbionese Liberation Army. Right, so we got a lot of Gothic issues that we are dealing with here, and I am trying to exorcise it by doing this cultural forensics. So anyway, this is what I mean by the genius breeding farm. There was a guy, and I'm not going to go through there's tons of books on it. There's tons of monographs. You can look it on TubeView, right? Yes, you can look on TubeView, but that's a starting point. Looking at TubeView is not research. Googling is not research. Research is research, all right? And all the pop-up pundits, that's all they do is they just Google each other and they watch each other's YouTubes and they just rehash it. That's the whole purpose, as it turns out, what TubeView was about. It was going to tube you. It's going to put you in a tube and just bury you into the ground. So check out Terman on a serious level. And that was why I looked at this book, because I wanted to see how we deal with them. And the first part of the book is devoted to a lot of the Terman issues. I haven't read the latter part of the book when we get to people like, the Silicon Valley heroes. I want to see what Malcolm Harris has to say about them. But they too are writing off the legacy of this specious notion that people who come out of Stanford University are brilliant and they're going to bring tons of money to your company's bottom line. And this is the epicenter of the startup revolution pioneered by these 2-story office parks in Palo Alto. There was these building codes saying that we're not going to build these giant Midwestern type factories belching out smoke. They're going to be we're going to even call them campuses. We're not going to call them factories. You can come in and we're going to have loose hours. You can wear jeans and your stupid little tennis shoes and your little filthy gray T-shirt. Like what's that little punk with the banking scam? Bankman-Fried. Yeah, you can just be a little pig like him with your little polyandry hijinks and your little your little your post-frat lifestyle, and you can make us rich. That's Palo Alto in our little campuses, right? But they are psyops factories, as you know. They're intelligence factories. They are in a manner of speaking, these fusion centers, and it's Surveillance Valley. It's DARPA Valley. That's the title of a book. A very good one, by the way, probably written by an Israeli operative, but it's a book nonetheless. And who knows, Malcolm Harris probably has a leash tied to him as well. But he, despite the strictures that the publishers, which are globalists, have put on, this is a Little Brown. I'm sure they're owned by some some German publisher or French Hachette or something. There's only a handful of them. That's why I can't get a contract, because all the white shoe girls, and because they're the manuscript readers, they don't need money, but they want to be somewhat productive. So they go into publishing or maybe something semi-legitimate, but it's not too taxing, but at least, it gives them a cover. They're the ones who, contract books, and they hate my guts. So we have Malcolm Harris that goes so far as to say that, and I'm reading from him just so you know I'm not exaggerating and creaming here. It says that Stanford proper, it's on page 108, eugenicist concerns in bionomic faith help shape the student body, literally and figuratively. Recall that part of the plan for establishing the school's prominence was to train students in topics and fields that were increasing beyond their numbers, so they make a big impact. Okay. And if the university was going to place its bets on exceptional individuals, then it needed the best material to work with. And that's where the testing comes in, right? The SATs, the GPA, and also these programs that you and I were not allowed into, the gifted programs in K through 12. Maybe you were, and if you were, congratulations. But I didn't fit the profile. My greatest academic distinction in K through 12, let's say I was student body president in 6th grade of John Marshall, even though I was in high achievement. And Barry Kaplan, who was in high achievement, I heard him over, we had lunch outside. During lunch, Barry Kaplan was trying to take me down as a peg because, I wasn't in high achievement. I became the student body president of John Marshall Elementary at 6th grade. So Barry Kaplan said, "We of the Japanese imperial government declare John Marshall Elementary School for the Empire of something like that." That was Barry Kaplan. Or I wonder what he's doing now. How you like me now, Barry Kaplan? All right, but okay, so that was one distinction, and in junior high school in ninth grade. Now, this is what I'm proud of. I was voted class clown. So you see, true to form, I've kept up. I've kept up my end so far as being a funny man, right? Funny man with an edge, right? That's why I always like the Irish American sensibility of George Carlin, who later did an album. It was called Class Clown. This is something that George Carlin and I have in common, except he became a famous comedian. I just became a brokeback professor at the University of California, Davis, who was harassed and persecuted by a bunch of crazy lesbians. And I got off every time. They gave me a clean, they said he's practicing his academic freedom. Right, because there are sane people in academia. They're the majority, by the way. They're intimidated right now because they don't want to come off as homophobic, like I'm doing now, or racist, like I'm doing now, or blah blah blah. But I really don't care. Do you understand? So they gave me a clean beat the hell. So a gay dude, what's his name? Forgot his name. Yeah, he turned it over and said, "We're gonna take 75% of your salary away. We're gonna do that." So anyway, that's another story. And I mentioned that he's gay. I should remember his name. I kind of blotted it out, but I should announce his name publicly because he's a real dick. And he's the type of person, just like Maureen Stanton. And you know what? You can fucking sue me if you want to, because I don't have any money. Right. Or whatever you want to do to me. Right. Because as I told your Jesuit henchman in the corner of Linda Catay, said, you cannot get me because I'm fighting like a dead man. I am the dead god, sword god. Oh God, what's his name? I'll remember it later. But yeah, he overturned all those studies. And these are all brilliant, smart guy. I'm sure they were told by their mother, "Oh, you're the smartest little child that's ever existed. Oh, you're gonna go far. You know, your name's Jeffrey Epstein. You're gonna make it. You're a Minch. Jeff. Wexler. Yeah, you're gonna be the top. You're from the right bloodline. You're a Levite. But watch out for those Chinese people. They're really smart. They even stay open 7 days a week. So we can go there on Saturdays and make fun of them. And you see these in the routines, right? That I grew up with in the 1950s. So that's where Barry Kaplan comes from, or Sarah Silverman, right? She has a boner, right? Just like Terman had a boner against yellow people. And they have a boner against yellow people right now because there's a move afoot right now at the Ivy Leagues to restrict admissions of Asian American people. And they did away with all the testing. They're doing away with all the evaluation. Now it's going to be a personalized evaluation so that Asian American people are not going to be put in the same trick bag as everybody else because they're outworking the rest of the population. Do you understand that? And unfortunately, there are not very many Asian American people. I had one on my show recently that are making an issue of it. So for the Asian American people who find themselves slipping down the ladder, you're no longer being admitted to med school or into the prestige law schools. You only have yourself to blame for it because you thought I was a crackpot. You thought I was an alarmist. You didn't want to hear about eugenics at Stanford University. You just wanted to take pre-med courses. or political science if you were on the law school track. Okay, let me finish with Lewis Terman. He started the positive eugenics program at Stanford University. And by that, positive, quote unquote positive, that means that he was going to identify, I'm using a phrase, it's not my phrase, the best and the brightest. That's David Halberstam, who's an author I respect, by the way, best and brightest, who was killed in a mysterious auto accident, I should say, head-on collision. David Halberstam. His brother's Dr. Halberstam, right? He coined the phrase best man. So anyway, Terman was going to identify them. And most of you who were in the chat room or are going to watch this have heard of the Stanford Binet test, right? That's because Stanford hijacked he's a Frenchman, Dr. Alfred Benet's test and sold it. And they also have a Stanford achievement test. I don't know if they're still selling it, but they made tons of money out of it. So this is when David Starr Jordan said, wow, there's money here. There's gold in them their hills of selling this idea of fake achievement and fake intelligence. Because we know intelligence and IQ and all the other measures are found in all populations, they're disparate populations. And you don't need me to tell you that all those theories of race, / intelligence have been discredited. And that's why the powers that be are scrambling around trying to figure out to do with all them Asian Americans who are trying to kick their way into the American establishment, right? And they're not always doing it in very, very flattering ways. I won't give you her name, but she was at UC Davis. I'll give you her name. Her name is Judy Sakaki. She's about my age. She's Sansei, third generation American. She had the same struggles as me. They said, Judy Sakaki, we're going to build you up and we're going to make you the president of Sonoma State, Cal State Sonoma, which is not far from me. And then they wrapped her up in a bunch of sex scandal and they set her up. She might have been complicit. I don't know. I'm not going to feel sorry for her because she walked away with $250,000 package and she went back to the faculty. She didn't get fired. She didn't get her salary reduced like I did. So, by the way, I'm telling you this. I'm giving you a preview because this is my book that I'm talking about. Not so much about me, but about the other Gothic underpinnings that are haunting us today, right? For the past 2.5 years and 3 years. That's a Gothic move, if I ever heard one. And again, it was put against the alien from outer space, the China virus. I like the way Orange Man articulates that in the Wuhan virus. This is all the retired generals who are working for, contractors, right? So they have to have an enemy, and the indispensable enemy is the yellow person. So the term, of course, there were no Asians, there were no blacks, there were no Latinos in termites programs. They all happened to be Northern Europe, no Jews, no Southern Europeans like Italians. They're all Nordic types, if I could use that typology, which is also itself specious, right? Or doesn't have much credibility, empirical value. And he used Binet, and here's the kicker, because so what? Even if you are intelligent, even if you are quote unquote smart, and even though you are educated, you've got your BA, you've got your MA, you've got your PhD, you've got your JD, whatever. You've got your initials, right? What about the question of what are you doing with this advanced knowledge? Are you, in and of itself, it is a marker of zero, zip. All it means is that you made it to an end of some sort of endurance race with all these different hurdles that are set up for you, and you ostensibly passed this test and this test. And the most important test of all is sociability. You've got to be just sort of a really nice, sociable person who knows how to use a fork and these days chopsticks, right? In order to blend in with your colleagues, and then you'll be okay. You got to drink and party with them and go to all the meetings and all the gatherings, and you're going to be, a very successful. This is any profession I'm talking about. You're going to be a very successful professional. That's why my father always told me, take up golf, take up tennis. Yeah, he never said try to get into Harvard or to Yale or Brown or Cornell or what, you get the point, right? its positioning within the social milieu there. So Leland Stanford, horse racing, it's a perfect fit. I mean, he had money to burn. You know those famous pictures by the early pioneering photographer Edward Muybridge, the ones of the horses galloping, and he found out through photographing them on a racetrack that at a certain point the hooves are not touching the ground. They're flying through the air like Pegasus for a moment, but because the human eye can't pick it up that quickly, it looks like they're, so there's a big bet on. There was money put on. So Leland Stanford put his money where his mouth is, and he hired Muybridge. He commissioned those pictures, and he said, "Yeah, those are my horses, and I win the bet." And he's also made tons of money breeding horses. So if you can breed horses with success to great profit, why not breed human beings? Especially if you could you could win, you could take over the world resources by having the best and brightest men. We're not talking about women at this point, right? This came later. So I'm using the male pronoun, men's. What if you have a small select group who are the result of positive eugenics identification program, and you make them into officers? By the way, Terman was on the team that helped identify leaders, officers in World War One. That's when psychology started to gain its legitimacy. The U.S. military, the Department of War, as it was called back then, recruited the psychology people. Say, we want to figure out who's a hillbilly mountain man, and we want to distinguish him from the officer material, right? So one guy's going to be on permanent latrine duty, the other guy's going to be the. So anyway, Terman was so he had a track record going into the formulation of the intelligence test. Now here's where it gets personal. Lewis Terman identified his own son, Fred Terman or Frederick Terman, as not being a genius, but he was in that category of the positive eugenic set. So he was given all the advanced training, and he got his degree at graduate degree, I think undergraduate at Stanford University. And his dad sent him to MIT for a PhD because he said, you're going to be much more valuable with an MIT degree and being put in touch with all the brainiacs of the East Coast of the Boston, Washington corridor establishment. And then you can come back to Stanford to pick up. And sure enough, that strategy worked. I think he, for sure, he was intelligent and he was educated, was smart. But what did he do with it? We're talking about Frederick Terman now, probably the most illustrious product of the termite program. He went to work for the famous Bell Laboratories, but then he was seconded, as they say in English, or seconded in French, or loaned out to the Pentagon wasn't there yet, the military, the war machine, the nascent budding war machine, right, in its early stage. And they say, well, we're going to, ask you to use your advanced mathematics, statistical skills to figure out how to create more damage in the bombing of German civilians. And we're also going to ask you how to do a similar set of calculations to kill a bunch of civilians in Japan. So it wasn't strictly about race, right? Because Germans, most of them are quote unquote white people. They're Northern European, right? Even though some Northern European, they're more Asiatic, Kaiser Wilhelm, he's kind of Mongol. He's kind of a Hun. But no, common sense, would say they're quote unquote Aryan people, Northern European, Central European. But they bomb their cities, their civilians. They did it at night with phosphorus bombs, with incendiary bombs. It had no military purpose. It was to punish the German people. That history is now beginning to be written about, by the way. It's more fully being revealed, and I have a lot of the DVDs and the Verboten scholarship that's beginning to come out on that area. A lot of what we learned before about World War II and the suffering of the German people has not been fully acknowledged. And there are a lot of war criminals who escape punishment um, by their brutalization, to put it lightly, of the German civilian population. Right. And instead, they said, you got to, Germans, you're going to be guilty forever. Right. And I'm not excusing the atrocities of the right. We were socialized, we were taught that relentlessly, but there's more to the historical information that we were not given that's beginning to emerge now. Same with Japan. Same with because, and so I'm not going to get into this argument about was Hiroshima and then Nagasaki justified. That debate has been going on since 1947, since 46, before the war was even over. And Henry Stimson himself said that by November 1945, Japan is going to throw in the towel. So it had nothing to do with the bomb. So I'm not going to, despite what I said, I'm not going to repeat that whole argument because you're never going to be convinced. You're convinced the story that you were told that the A-bombs attack ended World War II, but there's tons of scholarship that's now beginning to come out from people that don't have a political axe to grind that are telling the fuller story. Not to mention the fact that most of the Japanese war machine, including its great navy, was built by investments from the House of Rothschild and the great investment houses of Scotland and the shipbuilding technologies. So anyway, that's another part of the story here. In the meantime, we people who are not geniuses are not part of some sort of mentally gifted minor or gifted curriculum in school. We're going to be sacrificed to Moloch. We're going to be ritualistically incinerated in great cities like Dresden, because of these people who are obsessed by numbers like Frederick Terman. They're not thinking about humanity anymore, flesh and blood humanity. By the way, his dad, Lewis Terman, had to find him a wife because he was that inept, right? And his wife, of course, was drawn from the group of Termites. I don't know what the marriage was like. It probably went unconsummated for all I know, because Frederick Terman loved numbers more than he loved human beings. And that's what he was all about. He was part of the U.S. strategic bombing surveys, right? As a lot of social science, I mentioned earlier, a lot of social scientists, like I think Gordon Allport, Robert K. Merton was part of the U.S. strategic bombing. They all got cozy jobs in case of Merton, he went to Columbia, at these institutions to come up with phrases like self-fulfilling prophecy. Oh, genius. We'll still use it. By the way, I read all this material when I was in grad school. We had to read the whole history of our own profession. We had to learn the internal history of it to get to the state where we could do original work ourselves. But only later did I learn that Robert K. Merton, that wasn't his real name. His real name was Meyer Schlibowitz or something like that. Then he wanted to anglicize it. So he changed it to Robert K. Merton because he was into magic. He should have kept that, because that's all he was. He was a flim-flam artist, a shell game guy who was good verbally with the spritz. That's a Yiddish word. Look it up. Look at Leo Rosten's The Joy of Yiddish. Spritz. He was the king of spritz. So he came up with among other phrases, self-fulfilling prophecy. That's Robert K. Merlin. Okay. But myself, even Kurt Lewin, he anglicized his name to Kurt Lewin, right? And he was a Zionist all his life. His life goal, and this is according to his own biographer, who was close to him, his whole dream was to to teach at Hebrew University in Jerusalem because he was an ardent Zionist. Unfortunately, he got trapped in America, but they elevated him into the social science king because they wanted to use Jews for a certain purpose of bringing in that phase of the New World Order, just like they're using Asian Americans now to put the capstone on it with the bio-social, bioeconomic, bio-pandemic world order. And that's why you see it, Priscilla Chan being married off to Mark Zuckerberg. Do you understand? That's part of the racial optics, if you want to call it that, that's going on in 2020. Only a Professor Hamamoto would be able to hip you on that. I'm sure people even in the intelligence agencies and the highest ranks of the military who are watching this, even General Milley, they would not have figured this out. But I told you, I come from my lived experience personally, and the history of my people and my bloodlines. Okay. So this is payback to Fred Terman and all you exterminationists, Lewis Terman, the people who want to incinerate people like they were in the days of the Pharaoh, human sacrifice, right? That's not going to go down. There's something called Christianity, it said no more sacrificial baby sacrifice to Moloch, no more Baal, no more fire god, right? No more Beltane, right? And I know they might have been harsh with some residual druids. At least that's the story we're told. But something like Christianity all over the world brought a more than a sea change, a monumental change throughout the entire, including Japan, by the way. And I told you before, there are Christians in Japan as early as the early 16th century, and there were envoys to the Vatican by the mid 16th century. And Nagasaki had a huge population of Roman Catholics, and that city was incinerated. It was sacrificed by fire to exterminate that Roman Catholic population. All right, this is not the history that you know or you've been taught. I was on a Fulbright in Hiroshima, of all places, for 1 year. I was also on my own money at the University of Ryukyus in Okinawa. So I got to see colonialism. I got to see the history. I got to go to the war museums and the memorials to the dead civilians, like the Himeyuri Cliff, where a group of Japanese schoolgirls who were enlisted in the war effort. This is where the U.S. invaded Battle of Okinawa. They jumped over the cliff. Right? They said this is it right here. Right? So I've lived through this, and I haven't gotten through the Vietnam War. I haven't gone through, because that was when I was in college and in grad school. So I was of age of having this information at hand and involved in the anti-war struggle. Right, I'm talking about the Vietnam War, the wars in Southeast Asia, and I taught that history later on at UC Davis. Right, I was effective in some cases, but in other cases, I'd have the children of people who had been displaced from Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, and their parents are refugees. Now they're at UC Davis. And what did they want to do? They wanted to find jobs working for the war machine or for Monsanto, right? Or for Big Pharma. That's what they wanted. So I said, oh my gosh, this information is not, I'm failing as a professor because I'm not showing them that you are the product of this exterminationist Gothic history of America. You're the product, you're the result of it. Your parents and your grandparents and your family were visited upon by these horrific chemical agents, Agent Orange, dioxin, you name it, bombing, right? Bombing, led by Robert McNamara, who was also a numbers man, came out of the Ford company. And as a kid on network news, those of you who are old enough remember this, on the evening news, there would be a body count being reported every night, right? Us, them, right? So this is part of this. Oh my gosh, it's got to be a Luciferian expression. I can't really think of where Terman and David Starr Jordan and all these people are coming from. I think it was from the negative dimensions of what we've been talking about in previous talks, alluding to in previous talks about spiritualism and spiritism, like theosophy. Most of these guys were from the Midwest. They were used to breeding and culling and slaughter. They saw that, but they took that analogy and transposed it to humanity. But they also saw themselves as men of science, and I think they were also influenced through their mothers or aunts and grandmothers by the whole spiritualist movement that was really big in the late 19th century, early 20th century, like Phoebe Hearst and like Stanford. People of a certain class were very much into it. And that's why Blavatsky had such a huge warm welcome in America and still enjoys a great deal of cultural and political social currency in the United States of America. And what is one of the linchpins of Blavatskyism? It's about racial hierarchy, all the root races. I think there's 7 of them, right? And once I started reporting from my bully pulpit at the university about how the founder of the concept of La Raza, his name is Vasconcelos, he was the minister of education of the new Republic of Mexico, Estados Unidos de Mexico. Vasconcelos, he came up with this notion to unify the people, right? The mestizos, the European Mexicans, and the Indios, and to a certain degree the Negros, but not the Asiáticos. They're not part of the Tres Culturas, right? Even though they had a huge impact on Mexican history, especially having their land stolen by Mexico. They were in southern part of the U.S. and they took it over. They got expropriated not only from the U.S. but from Estados Unidos de Mexico. Maybe there should be a campaign for reparations from the government of Mexico. But anyway, the Minister of Education came up with La Raza Cósmica. So I bought the book. It's a bilingual edition published by University of Tejas Press. It's an academic press, it's a bilingual. And I read it. And Vasconcelos, guess what? He was a theosophist. He was a Blavatskyan in his whole notion of a cosmic race, La Raza Cósmica, which means superiority over everybody, the Asiáticos, the Negros, the Mestizos, the European, whoever, they were the La Raza Cósmica. And so this probably foundation funded, almost invariably they are, civil rights, quote unquote, organization called La Raza was founded in 1960. But once I started talking about Vasconcelos and the fact that he was an occultist and a racist, and that he was the one that came up with the name that they took, guess what? They changed their name from La Raza to Unidos. Right, but it's the same organization. So anyway, cultural forensics is very practical. Please join me in further adventures on TubeU and join my Patreon where you're going to have even more fun in this adventure. All right, breaking it down. And we're going to, we're going to not just forestall, but we're going to turn back. We're going to bring to a halt this eugenics experiment of 2023, right? These books try to imply that it's over. It's back in the past. This is in the old benighted days. He's a pretty good social historian, this guy. But it was back in the day. But, it's different now, right? You look at Elon Musk. I mean, he's not anti-Chinese. His empire's built on Chinese intellectual labor, right? But it looks like he is into the dark forces, right? But it doesn't matter because, at some point, I think he attended Stanford, so he's got that halo effect on him. All right. Well, I'm over my time here, 1 hour and 10 minutes, but I hit all the highlights and lowlights of the breeding of genii or geniuses coming out of Stanford University and how we still give these people much more respect than they deserve. People like Peter Thiel, checking his background, Jeff Bezos, and all these other characters and all these other people with their Ivy League degrees, who are law degrees primarily, who are recruited into doing all these different types of nefarious activities on the behalf of the global ruling bloodlines. All right. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I know I went all over the map here purposely as part of my Coltrane improvisation, but I hit all the chord tones. I brought them all to resolution, and I hope that even though you're exhausted, that you consider some of the more beautiful passages that I was able to squeeze out of my horn, my saxophone, that is. All right. Let's not, let's not leave room for ambiguity. It's my sax or guitar, whatever, my instrument, my musical instrument. All right. Because that's how I approach pedagogy, as you know by now. I'm just telling newbies. Why is this guy talking about this, that, and why does he bring himself into the story? I just want to hear about, Terman Termites. I just want to hear about standards. Is this clickbait? No, I'm talking about Stanford. I'm talking about a bunch of, 30 or 40% of the student body at Stanford who are Asian American, who are so stupid they're wearing a mask on graduation day. And that's when the handlers at the Hoover Institution or the big think tanks, they're looking at your picture on here with the mask on, all you Asian American people who are all masked up. They're saying, oh, yeah, the mind game has worked. It's worked. We got them into the self-hate and the self-fear of the China virus, of the Wuhan or the Kung Fu virus. We got them. We got them. They're going to be good. We'll be able to use them. A few of them. We'll be able to use them as we exterminate most of humanity and re-engineer the animal world and the crop world, the flower, the fauna and the flora. We're going to use them coming out of Stanford and, all the yellow people. And then we're going to exterminate them too. That's the bad news, all right, for you recent graduates and those of you who are about to graduate in 2023. Yeah, the future is pretty bright for you in the immediate sense, but in the long term, unless you watch this and share this talk by Professor Hamamoto, and share it with all your friends in your age group, you're doomed. By the time you really realize what's happening, it'll be too late. All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for bearing with me. The future looks brighter, I think, because I would like to leave you with one last observation, and that there's a mass awakening. But the last group to get in on anything are the Asian Americans, especially the educated ones. But I'm going to be patient, and I have hope for you. All right, and even Priscilla Chan, Dr. Priscilla Chan, please come home. All right, you do not have to be the queen consort of one of the global eugenicists. You do not have to be. Your dad ran supposedly a Vietnamese restaurant. There's a history behind that, by the way, which I'm not going to get into. So you come out of humble origins. You're part of that group that were refugees, and now you are married to Marky Mark, and you were the queen consort of one of the chief eugenicist frontmen. So again, you could have been one of my students. Well, you went to Harvard, right? Because probably you were identified very early on as one of the smart Asians, and we're going to be able to use you. So Terman is alive and well. So anyway, the point is that let's bring termination to Terman. How's that? My gosh, I could make it as a social scientist like Robert K. Slavitsky, otherwise known as Robert K. Merlin or Robert K. Merton. He has so many names, I'm sure he doesn't even remember how many he has. Yeah, I came up with a slogan. Terminate Terman. There you go. Hire me, Columbia. I'm free. I'm available. Bye. That's enough. I'm tripping out. Bye. Thank you.